At the heart of the Mediterranean, on the rocky shores of North Africa, rose the city of Carthage, a jewel of commerce, culture, and military might. Founded by Phoenician settlers in the 9th century BC, Carthage transformed from a modest trading outpost into a sprawling metropolis, its harbors teeming with ships, its markets bursting with spices, metals, and silks from distant lands. The city's wealth was legendary. It rivaled the splendor of Athens and the rising power of Rome. Its citizens prided themselves on innovation, maritime skill, and an unmatched naval tradition that allowed Carthage to dominate trade across the western Mediterranean. Yet, with power came scrutiny, and with scrutiny, envy. Rome, a city-state that had risen from humble beginnings on the Italian peninsula, now cast a wary eye on Carthage's growing influence. The story of Carthage's rise is not just one of economics and naval supremacy, it is a tale of ambition, vision, and resilience. Carthaginian leaders, such as the wealthy merchant aristocracy and influential magistrates, orchestrated a delicate balance between diplomacy and military expansion. Their armies, though smaller than Rome's legions, were formidable, often reinforced with mercenaries drawn from across Africa and Iberia. Carthage's generals understood the art of strategy, not just brute force. Every campaign, every treaty, every alliance was calculated to protect their city-state's prosperity. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, Rome was undergoing its own transformation. From the ashes of monarchy and civil strife, Rome had developed a system of government rooted in republican ideals. Its citizen soldiers, though inexperienced in the art of naval warfare, possessed a relentless discipline that allowed Rome to expand steadily. Yet, unlike Carthage, Rome lacked the wealth and influence to dominate Mediterranean trade, at least not yet. What it did possess, however, was ambition, strategic cunning, and an ability to forge alliances that would tip the scales of future conflicts. The tension between Carthage and Rome was almost inevitable. It was a collision of two worlds, the wealthy, cosmopolitan maritime empire of Carthage versus the disciplined, land-based, expansionist power of Rome. Carthage looked down on Rome as a provincial upstart, but Rome saw Carthage's wealth and influence as a threat to its ambitions. The early skirmishes and trade disputes were minor, almost inconsequential, but they foreshadowed a centuries-long struggle for dominance. Even within Carthage, not all was harmonious. The city-state's vast territories were held together through a network of colonies, client states, and mercenary forces. Maintaining loyalty across these regions required a combination of diplomacy, tribute, and, occasionally, force. This delicate web of control meant that Carthage's strength could be undermined not just by open conflict, but by betrayal and dissent from within, a vulnerability Rome would later exploit. The seeds of tension were sown in these alliances, a reminder that no empire is invincible, no matter how prosperous or powerful. As this narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that the struggle between Carthage and Rome is more than a story of armies and battles. It is a human story of ambition, rivalry, and the pursuit of dominance. Characters emerge, generals, statesmen, merchants, and citizens, each playing a role in shaping history. The stakes are immense. The survival of a great civilization hangs in the balance, while Rome quietly builds the foundations of its own empire. By understanding the early rivalry, the audience begins to sense the dramatic tension that will define the coming centuries. The rise of Carthage is also a study in contrast. Its wealth and sophistication offered the promise of security, yet its reliance on trade and external alliances made it vulnerable. Rome's relative poverty and militaristic discipline seemed disadvantageous at first, yet it allowed for flexibility, adaptability, and a relentless drive toward expansion. This juxtaposition, Carthage's brilliance versus Rome's hunger, sets the stage for a tale of ambition and downfall, a story where hidden alliances, cunning strategies, and unforeseen betrayals would ultimately determine the fate of civilizations. By the end of this section, viewers are fully immersed in the world of ancient Mediterranean politics, understanding not just the power and glory of Carthage, but the tension that loomed on the horizon. The stage is set for the secret maneuvers, covert alliances, and cunning strategies that would one day bring even a mighty city like Carthage to its knees. The audience is left with a sense of awe, anticipation, and a lingering question: how could such a formidable power ever be undone? As Carthage thrived on its wealth and naval dominance, the seeds of betrayal were quietly being sown. Far from the bustling markets and busy harbors, in shadowed Roman council chambers and among the coastal settlements under Carthaginian influence, whispers of discontent began to circulate. Many of Carthage's allies and subject cities, once loyal partners benefiting from trade and protection, started to chafe under the heavy demands of tribute, military levies, and political oversight. Rome, ever observant and opportunistic, recognized these simmering tensions and began to exploit them with careful diplomacy and cunning persuasion. Rome's strategy was subtle, almost invisible, a masterclass in psychological and political warfare. Ambassadors and envoys were dispatched, offering incentives, guarantees of autonomy, or promises of protection from Carthage's dominance. Some allies were bribed, some threatened, and others persuaded through appeals to shared interests or grievances. The Roman approach relied on secrecy and discretion, ensuring that Carthage remained unaware of the growing network of disloyalty forming around it. This hidden web of alliances would later prove more dangerous than any open battlefield. Inside Carthage, the atmosphere was one of complacency and overconfidence. Many leaders believed that their city's wealth and military prowess were enough to deter any challenge. They celebrated victories, expanded trade routes, and invested in magnificent infrastructure, temples, harbors, and fortified walls. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Some city-states began to quietly question their allegiance. Governors and local leaders, weary of Carthage's heavy-handed demands, considered Rome's overtures. These were not mere opportunists. They were individuals caught between loyalty to Carthage, self-preservation, and the lure of Rome's promises. Each decision carried immense weight. A single defection could tip the balance in a conflict that was still unseen by the Carthaginian elite. The emotional stakes in this period were profound. For Carthage, betrayal was not an abstract threat. It was a personal and collective danger that could destroy families, fortunes, and honor. For Rome, the stakes were equally high. Cultivating an effective secret alliance required careful orchestration, patience, and the ability to anticipate Carthage's every move. Every diplomat sent, every covert message delivered, and every deal struck was a gamble. The tension grew as Rome's hidden network strengthened, stretching like an invisible net across Carthage's territories, ready to tighten when the moment was right. The audience begins to sense the drama of unseen forces shaping history. Battles were no longer just fought with swords and spears. They were waged in whispers, secret negotiations, and subtle manipulations. The narrative emphasizes the human side of these machinations, governors torn between loyalty and self-interest, citizens unaware of the forces pulling their world toward upheaval, and Roman leaders quietly celebrating each incremental victory that would one day contribute to Carthage's downfall. By the end of this section, viewers understand that Carthage's enemies were not only across the sea but embedded within its own sphere of influence. The tension builds naturally, leading the audience from Carthage's earlier confidence to the looming threat of betrayal. The stage is set for the next phase of the story: covert battles, espionage, and the relentless tightening of Rome's grip on Carthage's fate. The secret alliance, carefully cultivated over years, is now poised to become the invisible hand that will ultimately shape the destiny of one of history's greatest civilizations. While Rome carefully wove its web of alliances, the true struggle for Carthage's dominance began in the shadows. These were the hidden wars, clashes that did not appear on any official battlefield but shaped the fate of nations just as decisively as open combat. From secret sabotage to espionage, Rome and its allies systematically undermined Carthage's influence, weakening its trade routes, destabilizing its colonies, and manipulating local leaders. Each act, though seemingly minor, chipped away at the foundation of Carthaginian power, demonstrating that in the war for supremacy, subtlety could be deadlier than brute force. Carthage, for all its wealth and military prowess, was not immune to the dangers of internal vulnerability. Governors in North African and Iberian territories, pressured by Rome's covert diplomacy, began to question the wisdom of unwavering loyalty. Small uprisings erupted, trade caravans were delayed or intercepted, and supply lines became increasingly unreliable. To Carthage's leadership, these disruptions appeared as unfortunate but isolated events, until patterns emerged, revealing a coordinated effort that threatened to erode their empire from within. The audience is drawn into the suspense, experiencing the gradual tightening of pressure as Rome's invisible strategies unfold. Character-driven storytelling shines in this section. Generals, governors, and spies emerge as pivotal players in a game of strategy, risk, and deception. Carthaginian commanders struggled to maintain order across vast territories, often unaware of which adversaries were acting openly and which were secretly undermining them. Meanwhile, Roman operatives worked tirelessly, exploiting human weakness, personal ambition, and political friction. Each decision carried moral and strategic weight. Loyalty was tested, courage measured, and every misstep could have catastrophic consequences. These narratives bring tension and emotional depth, allowing the audience to understand that the war was as psychological as it was physical. Several key examples of covert operations are worth highlighting. In Iberia, Rome secretly supported rebellions among Carthaginian allied tribes, diverting Carthaginian troops from other strategic campaigns. In North Africa, Roman agents influenced local leaders to withhold troops or resources during critical moments, creating logistical nightmares for Carthage. These seemingly small, calculated moves had cumulative effects, demonstrating the power of strategy and patience in warfare. They also heightened drama for viewers, as the city of Carthage teetered unknowingly on the brink of crisis. By the end of this section, the audience understands the magnitude of Carthage's peril. Victory on the battlefield was no longer enough. The city's enemies were everywhere yet nowhere, hidden in plain sight, shaping events with subtlety and precision. The tension is carefully escalated, moving the narrative from covert maneuvering to the stage where Hannibal's legendary campaigns will enter the story, promising high stakes and dramatic reversals. The hidden wars reveal that history is not only written by armies and generals but also by those who operate in the shadows, manipulating outcomes far from the spotlight. This section transitions naturally into the next, setting up Hannibal's bold gambles and the decisive clashes that will define the struggle between Rome and Carthage. The audience is primed for a mix of military brilliance, personal heroism, and the looming threat of betrayal, a combination that ensures engagement and suspense in the chapters to come. Amid the shadows of Rome's covert operations, one figure emerged as a symbol of Carthage's audacity and strategic genius, Hannibal Barca. Born into a family of military leaders, Hannibal was steeped from childhood in stories of Carthaginian glory and Rome's growing threat. By the time he assumed command of Carthaginian forces in Iberia, he had already demonstrated extraordinary tactical brilliance. Yet even he could not have imagined the monumental gamble that lay ahead, crossing the Alps with an army of tens of thousands, including war elephants, to strike directly at the heart of Rome itself. It was a move that would become legendary, both for its audacity and for the extraordinary risks it entailed. Hannibal's campaign in Italy represents the apex of Carthaginian military daring. Every step of the journey was fraught with danger, treacherous mountain passes, bitter winter conditions, and constant threats from hostile tribes. The audience is drawn into the narrative through vivid descriptions of these hardships, soldiers struggling through snow, elephants sliding on icy slopes, and Hannibal rallying his weary troops with a mixture of discipline and inspiration. The emotional stakes are immediate and gripping: Hannibal's reputation, the fate of Carthage, and the lives of tens of thousands of men rested on decisions made in moments of extreme peril. Yet Hannibal's brilliance was only one side of the story. The secret alliance that Rome had painstakingly cultivated in Carthage's territories now began to bear fruit. While Hannibal advanced through Italy, Roman allies within the Mediterranean disrupted Carthaginian supply lines, withheld reinforcements, and fomented unrest in Iberia and North Africa. This invisible hand forced Hannibal to operate with fewer resources than anticipated, turning what could have been a straightforward military campaign into a test of endurance, cunning, and adaptability. The contrast between Hannibal's daring offensives and Rome's behind-the-scenes manipulations heightens tension, keeping viewers on edge as each encounter carries the weight of uncertainty. The battles themselves, Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, are recounted with cinematic intensity. Hannibal's tactical genius is on full display: feigned retreats, ambushes in narrow passes, and the strategic use of terrain to offset numerical disadvantages. Each victory for Carthage is exhilarating, yet tempered by the audience's awareness of the broader strategic picture. Despite these triumphs, Hannibal remained isolated, his supply lines vulnerable, and Rome's resolve unbroken. The emotional rollercoaster mirrors that of Carthage itself, experiencing fleeting moments of triumph overshadowed by the looming threat of betrayal and strategic disadvantage. This section also delves into the human side of warfare. Soldiers endured unimaginable hardships, commanders wrestled with impossible choices, and citizens in Carthage held their breath, hoping Hannibal's gamble would succeed. The narrative highlights the courage, ingenuity, and desperation of all involved, providing a character-driven perspective alongside the sweeping strategic overview. The audience experiences not only the spectacle of battle but also the psychological and emotional pressures that define history at its most dramatic. By the end of this section, the story reaches a turning point. Hannibal's victories, though spectacular, cannot entirely secure Carthage's future. The secret alliance continues to tighten its grip, reminding viewers that wars are fought on multiple fronts, both seen and unseen. The stage is set for Carthage's eventual collapse, a combination of heroic military efforts, strategic miscalculations, and the relentless pressure of unseen adversaries. This sets up the dramatic narrative for the next section, where the fall of Carthage becomes imminent, and the consequences of betrayal and strategic cunning come fully into view. Despite Hannibal's daring campaigns and tactical brilliance, Carthage's fate was slipping away, not solely on the battlefield, but through a combination of internal instability and external manipulation. The secret alliance that Rome had carefully orchestrated now exerted maximum pressure. Allies of Carthage in Iberia, Sicily, and North Africa withdrew support, withheld troops, or actively sided with Rome, leaving Carthaginian forces stretched thin and increasingly vulnerable. The network of betrayal that had been years in the making began to have tangible, devastating effects, proving that empires could crumble as much from within as from external assault. Carthage itself was a city under siege even before Rome's armies arrived. Economic strain from disrupted trade routes, compounded by the costs of sustaining mercenary armies abroad, created widespread unrest. Citizens feared famine and financial ruin, while political leaders struggled to maintain cohesion in a society that had long relied on loyalty and order. The narrative emphasizes the emotional stakes: families torn apart, leaders forced into impossible decisions, and a populace witnessing the slow erosion of a once mighty civilization. The human cost of political treachery and military overreach becomes palpable, making the fall of Carthage not only a historical event but a deeply personal tragedy. Rome, meanwhile, continued to apply pressure with relentless determination. General Scipio Africanus, exploiting both Carthage's weakened allies and Hannibal's extended campaign in Italy, secured key victories in Spain and North Africa. These victories cut off reinforcements, isolated Carthaginian forces, and demonstrated the lethal efficiency of coordinated political and military strategy. Battles, once fought with valor and daring, were now decided by the cumulative effects of strategic attrition, deception, and betrayal. The contrast between Carthage's heroic efforts and Rome's calculated patience heightens the drama, keeping the audience engaged in the unfolding tragedy. As Roman forces approached Carthage itself, the city's defenses, once thought impregnable, began to crumble under both siege and internal discord. Mercenaries demanded payment, allies questioned loyalty, and civic leaders argued over strategy. The audience experiences the tension in real time: the siege engines pounding the walls, the cries of citizens and soldiers, and the growing realization among Carthaginians that the city's end was near. This is the culmination of decades-long plots, alliances, and gambits, a dramatic convergence of the seen and unseen forces that had been shaping the Mediterranean for years. By the end of this section, the emotional and strategic picture is clear. Carthage's fall was inevitable, a tragic intersection of human ambition, betrayal, and relentless opposition. The audience witnesses both the glory and the hubris of the city, feeling the weight of loss and the stark lesson that even the greatest powers are vulnerable when enemies are both outside and within. This sets the stage for the final section, where the legacy of Carthage's destruction is reflected upon, offering insights and lingering questions about loyalty, strategy, and the rise and fall of civilizations. With Carthage reduced to ruins, the echoes of its fall reverberated across the Mediterranean for centuries. Rome emerged as the unrivaled power, not merely through military might, but through cunning diplomacy and strategic alliances that had undermined Carthage long before the first siege engines struck its walls. The destruction of Carthage stands as a testament to the dual forces that shape history: visible conquest and invisible manipulation. It is a story where ambition met strategy, bravery clashed with cunning, and loyalty, both honored and betrayed, defined the fate of civilizations. The legacy of Carthage's collapse extends beyond the battlefield. Politically, Rome demonstrated the power of covert alliances as a tool for expansion, establishing a blueprint for empire building that would be emulated for centuries. Economically, the void left by Carthage's fall reshaped Mediterranean trade, consolidating Rome's control over resources, routes, and cities that had once enriched its rival. Culturally, the story of Carthage became a cautionary tale about overreach, complacency, and the fragility of even the most prosperous societies. The human cost is also striking. Entire populations uprooted, generations affected, and a civilization whose brilliance was extinguished by forces both within and without. Reflecting on Carthage's story, viewers are invited to see the interplay of strategy, ambition, and moral choice. The Carthaginians' trust in allies, their reliance on mercenaries, and their underestimation of Rome's political acumen reveal timeless lessons about the importance of vigilance and the dangers of overconfidence. At the same time, Rome's calculated patience, intelligence operations, and mastery of diplomacy illustrate the power of long-term planning and adaptability in the pursuit of dominance. It is a narrative where lessons transcend time, offering insight into leadership, decision-making, and the complex nature of power. The final emotional hook leaves the audience with a profound reflection. History is shaped not only by those who fight boldly on open battlefields but also by those who maneuver quietly behind the scenes. Carthage's story reminds us that the greatest threats are often invisible, and that the interplay of human ambition, strategy, and betrayal can determine the fate of entire civilizations. The audience is left with a mixture of awe, sorrow, and curiosity, pondering how empires rise, fall, and leave lessons etched into the annals of history.